Welcome to episode 215 of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Ashley Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. Today I'm interviewing writer-director Reese Eveneshen, who just did a cool low-budget sci-fi film called Defective. We talked through that film as well as how he got his start in the business, so stay tuned for that interview. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes or leaving a comment on YouTube or retweeting the podcast on Twitter or liking it on Facebook. These social media shares really do help spread word about the podcast, so they're very much appreciated. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcast, and then just look for episode number 215. If you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks, along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide. I'll teach you how to write a professional logline inquiry letter and how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. Really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. So now let's get into the main segment. Today I'm interviewing writer-director Reese Eveneshen. Here is the interview. Welcome, Reese, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show with me today.
Thank you very much for having me today.
So to start out, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up and how did you get interested in the entertainment business?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I grew up in the chilly west area of Canada in Alberta, Edmonton, Alberta, which, I mean, if you're from there and you have any interest in the film industry, I mean, as a kid, I thought, well, that's an impossible dream. There was nothing in Alberta. Now it seems to be actually quite a booming industry up here. But at the time, there was nothing. I don't know. I can't pinpoint the specific time that that the interest in the film industry happened. I just know that I always loved movies when I was a kid. I mean, I was obsessed with movies. You know, I would obsessively and religiously watch behind the scenes videos that I could get my hand on, completely wear out the VHS tapes on them. And, you know, I had all my little action figures. I would lock myself in my room and I would sort of perform my own movies in the bedroom with the toys and set a timer on a watch to be about 2 hours and go, oh yeah, I've made my own movie. So it has always been there. It's never gone away.
Perfect. And, you know, I've wondered this question about myself, and so I'll ask it of you. Is there a reason why movies were more of an influence than TV? Because I definitely feel like for myself, movies for some reason were more of an influence. And I watched a lot of TV, still watch TV. But for some reason, there was something about movies that I just love more. Do you find yourself, was there something that you like more about movies and TV? And if so, why did you gravitate towards one?
You know what? That's a good question, man. I'm not sure. I mean, because I'm the same sort of way, especially now. I mean, I love TV and I love movies. I mean, TV has gotten way better. I mean, it's at its best right now, I think. And maybe that could have been it. As a kid, I just didn't like it that much. You know, it was kind of ham-fisted and cornball. But yeah, I can't. It's hard to say. I don't know. There's just something about the magic of it. I think going to the theater, a big impact on me too. I mean, when, you know, just sitting in an audience as a kid with everybody else, I loved watching people's reactions to movies. And, you know, I liked sitting at home and making sure that I had friends around or even just family to watch movies with me. So I don't know, there's just a power that movies have that you can't get with TV. That you can actually, well, now you can now. But back then you certainly couldn't get that sort of drama and feeling.
Yeah. So what were your first steps to actually turning it into a career? You're living in a place where there's not necessarily a huge movie industry. Did you go to film school? And then, you know, what were those steps to actually saying, I'm going to actually try and make this a career?
Well, I mean, really long story short, by some crazy random happenstance, we ended up moving to Toronto, Ontario, which is sort of like the Hollywood North up here, I guess, as they call it. And I ended up having some family out here that was working in the industry. So even as a kid, they started bringing me onto film sets because they knew I liked that sort of thing. So, you know, 10, 11, 12, I was getting all kinds of exposures to actual movie sets and commercial sets and TV sets and talking with the crew and working with them. And they're just kind of, you know, maybe I was in that sort of young, innocent stage where I wasn't too much of a bother. So they said, okay, you can sit off to the side and you can kind of observe what we're doing. And I mean, naturally from there, it just sort of progressed. I mean, in high school, I was able to finally get my first camera and I started making movies with friends. And those stupid, silly movies we made kind of caught the attention of a few people within the Toronto film industry. And right out of high school, I was able to go work on these sets and work with these people. And I mean, I didn't go to school. My school was being thrown into these sets and just kind of learning by doing. And, you know, then I met other groups of independent filmmakers and sort of started coming up with them. And I can't pinpoint, you know, everybody always talks about what's the moment you broke into your career. I don't know. It just feels like a natural progression from high school on, you know, that here we are talking about this.
So those first films you were working on, I would imagine you started out as a PA and then slowly worked your way up. So maybe talk about that a little bit. How did you get from sort of the bottom of the totem pole to slowly get up a couple spaces? Were you writing spec scripts in your spare time? Were you pitching them? Were you just making connections?
I mean, I was definitely writing screenplays at a very young age. And while I was on these sets, and it's so funny to think of now because it's something I don't think I feel like I had more balls back then than I do now. But I would go to the line on set and go, hey, you want to read my screenplay? So, and I'm like who would do that? You know, just out of the blue. And to their credit, a couple of them would go, yeah, sure, okay, I'll read it. And they would give me some very polite notes. But yeah, more so out of high school, you know, I was writing screenplays in spec, like you said, and I was doing the PA work. And at a certain point on one, somebody on the crew asked me, what do you really want to do? And I said, well, you know, I want to be a writer and director. And they said, well, you're not going to make it happen here. Like being a PA is not enough. I mean, this guy had been stuck in that position. I'm not saying it's impossible to grow from that, but that's kind of when I branched off from that and I really started pursuing like getting the funding on my own and sort of getting films made on my own. And I mean, I sold a couple screenplays along the way, only one of which ended up getting made, but yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this just for a quick second. How did you sell some of those screenplays? Were those just connections you had? Did you at some point get an agent, and did he help facilitate the sales?
No, I've never actually had an agent, and I certainly didn't there. It was just strictly through connections that of people I knew. And there's so many things. I remember what movie they were trying to get a sequel made to a less than stellar video game adaptation that I'm not going to talk about, but they asked me to come on and kind of do a treatment for that because they said, well, he likes writing that sort of thing. This is sort of like a horror movie kind of thing. So it started with that. That didn't end up going anywhere past the first draft. But after that experience, that same producing directing team came back to me and said, listen, we have a few bucks. We really want to do this sort of action comedy bounty hunter sort of movie. Here's a 2-page treatment. Do you want to run with it and kind of do your own thing? And that's really how I got that job. It was just through the connection. Now, ultimately, and I'm sure this is a story for a lot of writers, the same sort of thing where, you know, they bought the script off of me and then the movie they made wasn't that script and somebody was brought in to rewrite it and yada, yada, yada. So all good learning experience.
yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's dig into Defective. Maybe to start out, you can tell us kind of just what the movie's all about, you know, pitch, log line, just kind of maybe sum it up for us.
Sure. I mean, it takes place sometime in the near future, and this deadly corporation called the SEA, the State Enforcement Agency, has legalized the first official police state in North America, and within this state they have these sort of urban pacification units called the Preservers of Peace, which patrol and guard the streets and dole out warnings and strikes. Now, on the surface, everything seems to be working because it is getting crime under control. But as there always is, behind the scenes, there's the nefarious actions that are happening, and people are actually getting executed for even the smallest of crimes. You're labeled defective, if you will. And one of these people is the main character. His name is Rhett Murphy. He's kind of a broken, lost guy, and he ends up getting labeled defective. And in the midst of this, he runs into his estranged sister who he hasn't seen in years. And next thing he knows, they're both on the run, and he has to protect her and protect himself as they kind of go on the run from this police state.
Okay, perfect. And so where did this idea come from? What was kind of the genesis of it?
Well, funny enough, it really came out of desperation because at the time, I think this is around 2013. For a few years prior to that, we had been trying to get another project off the ground. There was a completed screenplay. We were shopping it around, and it just we kept getting interest in it, but it wasn't enough, like it just nobody really wanted to grab onto it, run with it. It was sort of, well, if you find the money, we'll be interested, or, well, we like it, but we really want to change this and we want to change that. And it was getting to the point that they wanted to change so much of it that it didn't even bear any resemblance to what it originally was, which made it ultimately less interesting. So I was sort of getting fed up, and I said, I have to make something. Like, we got to get something off the ground, even if we have to do it ourselves. So I started writing a script, and I got to probably about 15 pages into it, and I wasn't quite feeling it. It had the same title, Defective, but it was a completely different plot. And then I decided, sort of as a writing exercise, sometimes I like to do a 180 in a scene if I'm getting stuck, and just try something really weird and different just to kind of get out of it. And that really weird and different twist I took was that I added one of these soldiers, these preservers of peace, into the scene. And I really liked where it went. So I scrapped the previous 15 pages, and I just started from scratch. And, I ultimately wrote what became the first draft of Defective.
Okay. And as I was watching this film, one of the things that occurs to me is all the special effects. And I'm curious, do you have some background in special effects that you knew you could do these on the budget you had? Maybe just let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I have a base level knowledge of special effects. I mean, it's, again, like I said, from being a kid and watching those documentaries and kind of working with like-minded people, I had a rough idea of how to pull everything off. But admittedly, there is a ton of stuff in that script that I had no idea. I just knew that if I were to surround myself with the right people, we could definitely find a way to do it. Because you got to understand, we were going into this. I mean, this is a very low-budget movie. But I knew that if we could pull it off, it would be really neat, and I was I wanted that challenge because I was growing bored and not doing anything. So I sort of took that base level knowledge of special effects and applied it to the movie, and, some of the people I brought on kind of helped and shaped that. And, that's sort of how that came about. But, yeah.
Okay. And I wonder if there's some lessons learned from this in terms of just the special effects. Are there some things that you can do fairly cheaply which give you a real sort of big bang for your buck? And then the flip side of that question is, are there some things that are really hard to do special effects wise that don't really add a ton of value to the project?
Okay. Well, I mean, I always think that if you can, as a filmmaker, you should definitely try and do as much practical as possible, because there's that tangible element that you can't get through visual effects. So in that sense, I mean, everything relatively was pretty easy to put together. I mean, the toughest thing were the suits in the movie. But if you think of the mechanics of that, it's just foam and plastic. I mean, the tough parts are designing it and then finding somebody to build it. But once you got past that obstacle, putting them on isn't a big deal at all. It's keeping them maintained during the shoot is the biggest thing, because they were constantly falling apart. I mean, they're plastic. Yeah. On the first day, things were ripping. I mean, it was hot glue and tape 24/7. I think the most difficult thing that we tried to do, and kind of on post, is the drone in the film, the flying drone, because we had originally built a full-size practical version that we could puppeteer from above off of cranes. And we were really trying to do it all in camera, but it got to a certain point that, it's just too clunky. It's too much. It was taking too much time up on the day, which on a smaller budget production can really eat into your schedule. So, yeah, I mean, that was probably the hardest part. But there was nothing in there that I look back on and go, oh, my God, why did we try and do that? So.
Perfect. So let's talk about your writing process a little bit, and we can be specific to Defective or even just in general on other scripts. But in writing this script, how much time did you spend preparing? And it even sounds like you started off on another project. But how much time do you spend outlining versus how much time do you spend actually in final draft writing?
Well, the outlining really depends on the project. I mean, I don't always outline. I usually tend to do what I really like to do is my first draft I call my vomit draft. which is the all or nothing draft where I just throw everything in. Because what'll happen is every time I sit down to try and write an outline, I just get too excited about scenes and I want to go write it. So I'll just start writing the screenplay. Now, on a project that I'm working on now, I am actually outlining because it's sort of a requirement through the producers who are looking at it. So that's been an interesting challenge for me. But on Defective specifically, there was never an outline. I just went right into script phase. And that first draft, I mean, I think I wrote it in less than a week. So.
Okay. And what I find when people do less outlining, generally that means there's a lot more rewriting. So what does that process look for you? So you have this vomit draft, and then how long does it take you to get like a first draft that you're happy with that you can start to show to people?
Well, usually how it works is this. So I finished the vomit draft. I have a trust and I have an objective look at things that I will send that to, and I know they don't look at it and go, oh my God, why are you sending me this? They can sort of look past the garbage part of it. And they start pinpointing, okay, this is working, this isn't working so much, blah, blah, blah. So it takes about, I'd say, 2 drafts after that initial vomit draft to get it to a point where I'm comfortable to start showing it to people. But then even as I'm sure you know, like, you are constantly rewriting your script. I mean, we were rewriting right up to the day we were shooting. We were rewriting as we were shooting, which we can go more into if you'd like. And certainly in post, we were still rewriting stuff. And I've had that on all the projects that we've worked on. I mean, the script, you never stop writing the script. It's almost like it never reaches a full comfort level to show somebody, you know?
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. What were you rewriting on the day? And I think this is a great, it's a great sort of insight into, because a lot of people listening to this podcast probably haven't gotten to that stage where they're seeing their scripts produced, and understanding a lot of the practical elements of production would probably be helpful for them. So maybe just talk a little bit about some of the specific scenes that, you know, maybe they didn't work when you got there and you had to rewrite them on the day. Sure.
I mean, well, it's funny because a lot of it builds up to leading up to the shoot, which is that I always was having trouble with, I felt like I had the first act of the script nailed down pretty tight and the third act, but it was always the second act that I had trouble with on paper every time we'd get to it, and every time we'd work on it, and we reshaped that second act. I mean, you know, the second act is always sort of your connection. You've set up all your threads in the first, and then you're kind of paying off and building up to your third act. And I was like, man, we just cannot crack this second act. So anything that was in the second act, whenever we got to shooting on set with it, I was usually rewriting it on the spot. And it's tough because, I mean, you're talking almost about 25 pages worth of stuff that was being rewritten. Yeah, it's tough to pinpoint a specific scene. I would have to sit with you in the movie for that second act and go, yeah, this part here, this part here, this part here. I know there's a shift from the first act to the second act where, you know, the first act of the movie is sort of, you watch the film?
I've watched about half of it. Yeah.
Okay, you watched about half of it. It doesn't matter. So the first act is sort of like more of a drama in a roundabout way. And then it makes a sudden shift to becoming sort of like a political sci-fi conspiracy thriller. So finding a way to shift over and what scene to start that transition with was always very tough. And it went from being set in a limo to being set in a boardroom to being set in, and now it's 2 different locations when you see it in the final film. And then there's always the scene that every writer hates, which is the big, it's the exposition scene. It's the big dump of information, which happens about 45 minutes into the movie, where one of the main characters, unfortunately, I kind of wrote myself into a box because it's literally 2 people sitting down and talking about the situation, which is just so boring. But at the time and with our budget, I'm like, well, we have no other options. I mean, Terminator always cracked it with exposition. You know, they're in a car and it's a big chase scene through LA, and he's doling out this exposition. I thought it was great. So that chunk, which is about, in the script was about 8 pages, and in the movie, I think it's only about 6 minutes when all is said and done. A lot of that was being rewritten on the spot because we had shot so much by the time we got there that we're like, oh, this has changed now. Because things change on the day as well. You know, I'm never telling the actors to, and I don't think you should as a filmmaker, even as a writer. It's impossible to predict somebody's cadence of speech or how they talk or their rhythms. And I think it's unfair to ask actors to do exactly what it says on page, because they don't talk like that. Some might be able to kind of transform their way into it. So I'm always pretty free with not so much changing all the dialogue, but finding a way to get the same information across, as long as they can, in a way that's comfortable for them, because it's ultimately going to come out more natural. So, and in that case, things change, and then you're changing as you go along. The big thing that did change while we were shooting was always and it's a big spoiler, so I'm not going to ruin it, but it's the final 10 minutes of the movie. That was written more times than I care to count, because we're seeing how the characters were developing a little bit differently than they were on page. And the final 10 pages really pays off everything that this brother and sister has been talking about and it's been leading to. So when we got to that final scene, man, I was sweating bullets, because on the day we were scratching stuff out, we were writing down in pencils and pens, and it was tough. It was tough. So yeah. And then furthermore, in post, the funny thing, like I said, is I didn't like the second act, and the third act worked, and the first act was the one I was comfortable with. When we got into post and started editing, it turned out that the second act flowed just fine. It was the first act that had all the problems. But we had no idea until the film was cut together. And sometimes I've seen that happen too. You don't know until you've shot it. And that's a pain in the butt, because we cut about 15 minutes out of it, and we went and reshot a handful of stuff to kind of tweak it and make it better. So yeah, man, it was a bit of a slog on this one.
Yeah, so. Yeah. So what does your writing days look like when you actually get in the flow with stuff? Do you write for 12 hours a day? Like you mentioned, this vomit draft was in just a week. I'd imagine that's a lot of hours for that 1 week.
Yes.
But maybe just talk about your actual day, what it looks like when you're actually in the flow of writing.
Oh, well, first thing I need to do is I come into this room, which is the room you're seeing now. I shut the door, turn off the lights, and I have to write in complete silence. It's okay if if my wife's watching something in the living room, that's fine. But in this actual room, this is like the safe zone. I can't have any other noise. There can't be music. There can't be movies playing. I have to write in complete silence. And I don't know why that is, because I used to be able to write with a movie playing in the background, and I just can't do it anymore. And I think part of it is I spend most of the time, it sounds ridiculous, but I'll talk to myself. Like I have to say it out loud to try and verbalize it and figure it out. But day to day it changes. Some days, like you said on that vomit draft, you could fly through and I could get 15, 20 pages done. That doesn't mean they're good pages. They're just getting material out. But then you have other days where you literally only get a page done, and you've been sitting at your computer for probably 7 or 8 hours, Yeah. I try and keep I like to do a 9 to 5 schedule, because I like to have time to socialize in the evening, I like to make dinner for my wife. I like to spend time with her, and then, I'll either come back to it later on at around 10 or 11 at night and kind of crack around with it for an hour. But I try not to do that, because then when I go to bed, then the ideas are still so fresh and they start flowing. So it's usually morning's a really good time. Afternoon, things kind of slow down and they peak a little bit more in the evening.
Okay. What does your development process look like? So you have a vomit draft, I imagine, then you spend a little bit more time polishing it up. Number one, how do you know when it's ready to show to people? And number two, who do you show it to, just to get notes? Do you have a few trusted friends, or the producers, directors? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, after that vomit draft, like I said, immediately I show it to 2 people specifically. So I've a friend of mine, my business partner, Peter Zabo, who produced Defective and who I've known for 10 years. He's able to look past the vomit, so to say, and kind of see the nuggets and the chunks and go, well, I can see what this could be. And then I have another great friend of mine, his name is Justin, who's also a writer, who I generally tend to think is pretty good when it comes to story structure, way better than I am. He's able to pick out that, and they're both really good at being honest. Like, they're not, I don't have to worry, like, they can hurt my feelings. It's okay. As a writer, I can deal with that from them specifically. So usually from that vomit draft, they get it, I get their notes, and I start working from that. And we do that about 2 more times. And then after that, that's when I start showing other people. We get it a bit more comfortable from there. So
Okay, perfect, perfect. How do you approach stuff like screenplay structure, maybe genre requirements? I think it's interesting. This one's a sci-fi script. Are there some certain genre requirements that a distributor or producer wants in a film like this?
Um, yes, there are, but I think the second you start writing to somebody's mandate, I think it makes a lesser product. Because I mean, no good movie has ever come out of, and I'm not trying to say this is gold by any means, but no good movie has ever come out of anybody trying to write to an algorithm or anything like that. And I mean, yeah, there are a lot of producers and studio systems out there who want you to fall in line and go, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, that's really good for distribution here and there. And I'm like, well, if that works with the movie, sure, you can find a way if it comes naturally to the script, but yeah, sometimes you got to be stubborn and sort of fight your way through it. I mean, and more often than not, I mean, I have yet to have any real issues with that, because usually you can kind of find a happy balance of the two. And I mean, with Defective specifically, I didn't have to write for anybody because I knew that we were going to find the financing ourselves. Like, it was going to be an independent film. So I knew that, well, we don't really have to appeal to anybody, so to say. So I don't have to, you know, by page 10, this doesn't have to happen, and I don't need this big turn or anything like that. But I mean, naturally, you know story structure, you know there's your act breaks and all that stuff. So, you know, I'm aware of it as I'm writing, for sure. But I like I said, I don't plot it down beforehand. I just kind of dive in and go for it.
Yeah. And as I talk to producers, especially when you talk about low budget films, distributors, producers, sci-fi, like low budget sci-fi is, I'd say, something that they definitely like. How much of that played into your sort of decision to go ahead and pursue this as a project that you were going to go raise financing, maybe even write the script? Were there some business decisions, or this was just a story you wanted to tell?
Truthfully, it was just a story I wanted to tell. I mean, I've always loved science fiction, and I've always, I mean, I grew up watching sci-fi movies with my dad when everybody had gone to sleep in the house. And I mean, there was a certain style of sci-fi movie that I felt we hadn't seen. And, you know, I was kind of inspired by like things like Logan's Run, Soylent Green, Running Man, Planet of the Apes, the Total Recall, RoboCop, obviously Terminator, that kind of era of sci-fi film, the golden age, where I went, you know, maybe at the time they were, you know, nice and polished and glamorous, but now, because of just the way they've aged, they have a nice dirtiness to it that I thought, well, I just haven't seen that. I want something smaller like that, something smaller scale and sort of shot more from the hip. And I want to infuse that into the story that I was working on. So it was story first, and I wasn't thinking about the business side of it. I mean, it does certainly help that sci-fi is a big thing for sure. But even at the time I was writing it, sci-fi, low budget sci-fi movies were not as big as they are now, for sure. But yeah, story first to answer. Short, long story.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so now you've got a script that you're pretty comfortable with. What were those steps to actually going out and raising the money and getting this thing into production?
Well, luckily, like I said, because we had spent so much time beforehand working on another project that didn't get off the ground, we had a few leads and a few different ideas of how to go about finding money a bit faster. So, I mean, the first thing we did was we put together a business plan, sort of like a giant 20-page, you know, legal document, essentially saying, this is the story, this is who we are. We did do some research. We talked to some other filmmakers and some distributors about, hey, if we were to do a sci-fi film, what are they selling for now? You know, it was good to get that sort of market research done, and then we could use that in our pitch package. And then we took that pitch package and we just started talking to anybody we could get a handle on, you know. Oh, do you have an ear? Do you want to listen? You know, friends, family first. That's kind of the easy go-to. And then from there, they would tell somebody who would tell somebody who would tell somebody. And it just kind of sprung out of that. Now, if I got to be honest with you, I mean, it certainly wasn't easy. It was still a tough sell. You know, it's independent movies specifically, or investing in movies in general, is a very dangerous gamble at that.
Needless to say, yeah.
That some people don't really like to partake in, and some people do. I mean, we had a lot of people who invested just because they wanted to brag to their friends that, hey, I invested in a movie. Look at this cool thing that I'm doing. So that's what we did. We just kind of went out and sought the investment ourselves. Now, for a period of about 6 months there, we did manage to actually get another producer attached to the project with his own production company. And things were looking pretty good, but as it is sometimes, it just sort of fell apart, and it got to a point where we were saying, listen, the full budget we want isn't coming together. We've raised a little bit. What if we were to just go shoot it for a slightly smaller budget, but we start shooting now with what money we have and then raise it as we start going? And the producer at the time respectfully said, listen, I can't, that just sounds too risky. I can't get behind that idea. So he dropped out and we moved forward, and that's exactly what we did. We started production with not even a quarter of the budget, shot what we could, took a break, cut that footage together, and went back to the investors with that footage and said, listen, this is something concrete that you can see. Got more money and continued to shoot. All in all, it took us about a year of on and off shooting until we got to the end. I mean, we really wanted to get it done. I mean, there was not like there was anybody knocking down our doors to make a movie. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I want to go back on a couple of things you just said. You mentioned that you had been working on this other film, and so that so you had built up a couple of leads. Why didn't that other film spark, and why did this one? Was the other one a little bit bigger budget, and so you felt this one was a little more realistic, or why did that other one? Why isn't that other one, I guess, the one we're talking about now?
Well, the biggest one is that it's funny because it's actually a smaller movie, but for some reason the initial estimates that kept coming in for it were, well, this has got to be $1.5 million, $1.7 million, and it's just too big. It was mostly a budget thing more than anything, like you said, and it was also the concept was. It's a bit of a strange concept for a movie, and people couldn't quite wrap their heads around it. I mean, these things happen, It wasn't a cut and dry script, so I mean, Defective was a bit easier of a pill to swallow, but mostly it was a budget thing.
Okay. And you mentioned that you had gone to some distributors and just to get some rough numbers about what a low-budget sci-fi film is worth. And, I've had conversations with distributors, and it's always very tough, I find, to really pin them down. And it seems like over the last few years, it's gotten harder and harder to pin them down. I mean, the quality of the film, the finished product is just so important. Obviously, the cast. I mean, there's so many variables. And I can never quite get a straight answer, from a distributor. Like, okay, if you make this film on this script, this is how much it's going to be worth. How did you get those? And first off, I guess, how did you get those relationships with the distributors to even ask them those questions? And secondly, how did you actually finagle, sounds like fairly straight answers out of them?
I mean, well, a lot of it is just I have fairly good relationships with sales agents, and sales agents know the distributors. So if you have a good sales agent on your side, mm-hmm. I usually channeled most of my questions through the sales agent. So I really got to give them more credit. But sales agents also are a great source of, because they're the ones selling the movie. Mm-hmm. So they know directly, like, okay, well, if you kept it in this budget range, or if we sold it for X amount, this is kind of roughly a projected budget of, this is what we could sell it for based on previous things like that. So the big golden answer there is the secret was going through sales agents, because they sort of hold all the keys to the distributor kingdom. Because you're right, if myself, just as a writer and director, now I do know some distributors just from past experience from working with them. But yeah, if I were to just cold call them, most of the time they just tell you where the door is. So.
Mm-hmm. And so that's these relationships with the sales agent. Those are from some of your previous films, previous
yes.
projects. That's how you've gotten those relationships. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So how can people see Defective? Do you know what the release schedule is going to be like?
Well, I know it comes out on video on demand February 13th, and I think it's a slow rollout from there. I mean, the distribution model has changed so much from what it was even 10 years ago. So it starts on video on demand, and then I think it goes to digital, and then it goes to physical. So I believe that's what it goes. But February 13th for sure, video on demand, definitely.
Okay, perfect. And I always just like to end the conversation by asking the guests how people can kind of keep up with what you're doing, Facebook, Twitter, anything you're comfortable sharing. And I will, of course, round all this stuff up and put it in the show notes as well.
Sure. I mean, well, first off, we love to direct people to our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/defectivefuture. We've had that page running since we started production a couple of years ago. So if you even just start right at the bottom, we've got a ton of behind the scenes photos, videos. You can literally track every stage of the production. So it's kind of cool if you're sort of into that. And I mean, we keep it constantly updated with release dates and different trailers and a bunch of new stuff that we have coming out. And from there, you can find a lot of us that have worked on the movie. You can find me on that page. I'm just directed by Reese on Facebook. And on Twitter, I'm just at Reveneshen, that you can find me. And same with Instagram as well, same handle.
Okay. Perfect. Well, Reese, I really appreciate your coming on and talking with me today. Thank you, and I wish you luck with this film.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Perfect. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Bye. I just want to mention a new service that I recently launched at Selling Your Screenplay. I've built the SYS Select Screenplay database. Screenwriters upload their screenplays along with a logline, synopsis, and other pertinent information like budget and genre. And then producers search for and hopefully find screenplays they want to produce. I'm adding features to this nearly every day, so ultimately it will be the hub for all SYS Select services. If you're a member of SYS Select already, you should have already received your login information. Please email me if you don't have that. I've already got several dozen producers in the system looking for screenplays. To learn more about this service, just go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. When you join SYS Select, you get access to the screenplay database that I just mentioned, and you also get access to all of the other services that we provide to SYS Select members, like a monthly newsletter that goes out to over 400 producers who are actively seeking material from screenwriters. Each SYS Select member can pitch one screenplay in that monthly newsletter. Also, we have screenwriting leads. We have partnered with one of the premier paid screenwriting leads sites, so I can syndicate their leads to SYS Select members. There are lots of great paid leads coming in each week from our partner. Recently, I've been getting 5 to 10 high-quality paid leads per week. These are producers and production companies who are actively looking to buy material or who are actively searching to hire a screenwriter for a specific project. If you sign up for SYS Select, you'll get these leads emailed directly to you several times per week. These leads run the gamut from production companies looking for a specific type of spec script to producers looking to hire a screenwriter to write up one of their ideas or properties. Producers are looking for shorts, features, TVs, and web series pilots. It's a huge array of different types of projects that these producers are looking for, and these leads are exclusive to our partner and SYS Select members. Also, you get access to all of the SYS Select classes that I've done over the years. You can learn more about those and see what classes are available by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/online-classes. Also, as a member of SYS Select, you get access to the SYS Select forum, which you can post your logline and query letter in there, and we will give you a critique on that. As well, you can post any screenwriting-related questions, and we can have a conversation inside the forum about that as well. Once again, if all of this sounds like something you'd like to learn more about or perhaps sign up for, please go to sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. Again, that's sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I'm going to be interviewing writer-director Michael Radford, who just did a film called The Music of Silence, which is a biopic on the singer Andrea Bocelli. So keep an eye out for that episode next week. So this week I thought I would try something new. Today I'm going to end the show by answering a couple of questions that have been emailed in to me. If you have a question, you can always email me at info@sellingyourscreenplay.com. Please check the Selling Your Screenplay frequently asked questions first, because probably more than half of the questions that I get through email I've already answered multiple times, and I've posted the most common questions on the FAQ page. You can find that at sellingyourscreenplay.com/FAQ, and again, that stands for frequently asked questions. So check that out first. If you don't see an answer there, then please do feel free to email me, and I'll try and get you an answer back, and perhaps I'll even read it on the podcast in a future episode. So today I've got two questions which are somewhat similar, and they're questions that I seem to get quite often, although, they're always a little bit different, but I feel like they're sort of getting at the same thing. So I thought I'd read them here and try and answer them. And just FYI, I have edited these questions a little bit just to make them a little more concise for the purposes of this podcast. So the first question was something like this. I have a quick question regarding the script I'm developing. Would it be possible to assess just half of it? The reason I'm asking is because I write in a foreign language, and the first half of the script has been sent to an agency for translation. I thought if I'm going in the wrong direction, then at least I can improve it before I send the second part in to be translated, rather than retranslate the whole thing later after I've done numerous rewrites. So I think the question, it seems like a very logical question, but I think the writer is looking at this in sort of the wrong way. If this is your first screenplay, I can pretty much guarantee you that you are going in the wrong direction, and this screenplay probably is not very good. But that's okay, because that's part of the process. Writing, learning, getting better, and improving. That's how you get better, is by going through this process. Writing something that doesn't quite work and then getting better as you learn from each and every script that you write is exactly what you must do to get better. So that's my advice. Go through this process completely with this script, and then go on to the next script and the next script and the next script. And maybe if you're lucky, your 9th or 10th screenplay will be pretty good. And that will be the one that hopefully gets your career going. But just don't get caught up too early trying to be a perfectionist on this first screenplay. I worry that you'll never get it done and you'll never really be improving, because again, the way you're going to get better at this is by writing multiple screenplays. I mean, on your first screenplay, part of being a good screenwriter, it's not just the words on the page, it's thinking about which of these ideas that you have in your head, which ones should actually be, they should actually be turned into a full screenplay. And there's a good chance with your first screenplay, you didn't vet the idea properly. So no matter how well written it is or how many rewrites you do on it, there's a good chance it's never going to quite work, because sort of the premise may not be solid. You may not be on solid footing. So again, especially for your early scripts, I wouldn't get too caught up on trying to make them perfect, trying to make them good. I would just try and get them out there, maybe take 1 or 2 passes on them, and then move on. Obviously, the further along you get in the career, the more you've got to kind of tighten that down and really knuckle down and try and start making the scripts up to industry standards and presentable. But early on, I just think there's more value in just getting that first script, getting that second script, that third script, just getting them under your belt and getting on with it, and going through that whole process. And it sounds like this translation is going to be part of your process. So there's going to be a learning curve there, working with the translators, finding a translator, hiring the translator, how much money you should spend on the translation. All of those are going to be part of your process. Eventually, they're going to be part of your process. So you might as well get the practice now of going through that process. Again, there's going to be some missteps here. You're going to maybe hire the wrong translator. Maybe you're going to hire a translator that their English isn't as good as you had hoped and stuff. And that's, figuring that out and finding that and figuring that part of your process out is part of your sort of overall screenwriting journey. And the sooner you can start on that, I think the better off you're going to be. So the second question went something like this: can I send out query letters before the script is done? So this is a kind of a quick, clear answer. I would say no, do not do that. What happens when you send a query letter out in this day and age, I mean, typically it's an email, so you'll often get a response back the same day, sometimes within, 10 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. You'll get a response back very quick. So what are you going to do if someone requests the screenplay that you haven't even written yet? You're going to go and sit down and try and write it up real quick. That's a recipe for disaster. You're writing too quickly. You haven't necessarily thought it through. You don't have time to do rewrites, really get up to industry standards. So that's not ideal. I mean, writing the script up could take a month or 2. And again, now you feel this pressure if someone's waiting for it. So there's a good chance you're going to send it in before it's really ready. Again, that's not a good position to be in. And by the time you get this screenplay developed and written up, any interest in the screenplay that this producer had will have dissipated a lot. I mean, they probably won't even remember you and your query letter. So I don't see that there's really a lot of advantage to doing this. But also, and this is really the main point with this kind of a question, you're wasting the time of the producers here. You're sending out producers, you're sending out query letters for scripts you haven't written, and you're asking a producer to read pitches for a screenplay that you yourself don't even think is worth the time and energy to actually write up. Producers are smart. They remember folks, and they might save this email. I mean, Gmail, that's the whole point of Gmail when it came out, is you never have to delete your emails. They may save your email and wait for that script to come in. And then, if you don't get around to actually writing the script, or you send it in and it's terrible because you wrote it too quickly, the producers are going to remember these things. And, maybe they're going to flag your email. And then down the road, as you start to pitch them on your more mature work, hopefully your scripts have gotten better, they may not give you a second chance. So again, one of the other big things you're trying to do is just build a relationship with a producer. And you have to do that in an honest way. And, pitching a bunch of scripts that you haven't even written, I just don't think is going to get you to that position. I mean, the relationship is what you want, especially in these early days, and you want these producers to think that you're talented and reliable, not a flake. and you don't want them thinking, gee, yeah, you send them another query. Yeah, I requested this script from this guy last year. He never sent it to me. It's like, you just get a reputation of being flaky. That's going to be the impression that these producers have of you if you never send the script in, or you send in a script that's half-baked and poorly written. So bottom line, don't do that. So now both of these questions, to me, they're sort of getting at the same thing. They want to be as efficient as possible. And I get that. I like to be efficient too. I mean, it allows you to do more stuff, potentially write more scripts. I mean, efficiency is great, but the first writer doesn't want to spend the money on the translation unless the script has potential. And again, that seems like a reasonable sort of line of thought. And the second writer, his question, he wants to pitch scripts before he writes them. And I suspect this is so, at least in his mind. He doesn't want to have to spend time writing screenplays that no one will request. And there's a certain logic to that, but there's also there's not a lot of logic to that, because I can pretty much guarantee you that I could write up a query letter for almost any idea, and I could get at least a few script requests from it. Any idea. I am skilled enough with query letters and skilled enough with log lines, and I have a big enough pool of producers to send it to that I could get at least a handful of producers requesting almost any ridiculous idea that anybody came up with. So this idea that there's this sort of vetting process, by sending it to producers, maybe you have 5 ideas and you send out 100 query letters for each idea, and one of them got 1 request, one got 7 requests, one got no request. So then you say, oh, well, I'll write up that one. But again, think about what you're doing. You're wasting the time of these producers. Producers are not there to vet your ideas. I mean, you're sending them a letter, you're asking them to take time out of their busy day to read those query letters, and furthermore, the screenwriting is not so much the idea as much as the execution. So you can have a terrible idea, but if the execution is great, your script might still have a chance. So again, the logic, I'm not sure I necessarily would agree with this idea that you can send these things out. It's A, inconsiderate to producers, and B, I don't think even if the producers agreed to kind of give you some sort of feedback on just the ideas, I don't know that they're really going to be able to tell if that script is going to pan out, because it's going to be ultimately so dependent on the execution. But the bigger point that I'm trying to make with both of these questions is, to me, they show an inherent lack of commitment to screenwriting. Becoming a screenwriter and actually making money as a screenwriter, it's going to require you to go down a lot of dead ends. That's part of the process. If you're not willing to go down those dead ends, explore things that never will amount to anything, then this may not be for you. You're going to write a bunch of screenplays with no real market potential. That's okay. That's part of the process. I did it myself. Every successful screenwriter, I really doubt you're going to find any screenwriter in Hollywood that has actually been paid money to write a screenplay that didn't write a whole bunch of scripts that stood no real chance of ever selling, or even were good enough to get them work or anything else. Part of the process is the inefficiency. It's exploring things that may or may not pan out. It's being willing to explore things that you don't think are going to work, but maybe they will, and maybe it will lead you down a path in your own writing, in your own journey, that just is interesting. And maybe that originality and interest, maybe that's the thing that you will be known for. Maybe that's how you're going to write your scripts and make them stand out, is by exploring some of these things that at first glance might feel like a dead end. Writing in general, and screenwriting specifically, it's an art form. I mean, it requires a lot of just noodling. It requires you to spend a lot of time practicing it. And I feel like if you try and be too hyper efficient, you actually end up missing out on precisely the practice that you need. Anyway, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. Maybe we can get a conversation going. You can leave comments on the individual episodes on YouTube, or you can leave comments on the individual episodes on Selling Your Screenplay at sellingyourscreenplay.com. So I'd be real curious to hear people's thoughts on this. And again, maybe we can have a little bit of a conversation in the comment section. So if you have any thoughts, feel free to post them. I read all the comments, and will happily respond to any comments that get posted. Anyway, that's the show. Thank you for listening.